A teen abandoned by her family, pregnant at 14, banished to Florida highways. By 1990, Aileen Wuornos would become the most notorious female killer America had ever known. 7 men dead, a trail of trauma and violence, and a courtroom that struggled to understand. Was this the making of a monster or of a victim? The real story begins long before the killings. Aileen Carol Pittman was born on February 29, 1956 in Rochester, Michigan. Her father was already in prison for child molestation, and he would later take his own life. Before Aileen turned 4, her mother abandoned her and her older brother Keith, leaving them with their grandparents. The home they entered was anything but safe. Aileen later described years of physical and sexual abuse by her grandfather. Family records and court documents support a pattern of neglect and violence, though some details remain contested. By age 11, Aileen was trading sexual favors for food, cigarettes, and small change with boys in her neighborhood. School offered little refuge. She struggled with discipline problems, skipped classes, and eventually dropped out before high school. At 14, she became pregnant after being raped by a friend of her grandfather. Her son was born in a Detroit maternity home and was given up for adoption. The pregnancy marked the end of any remaining stability. Soon after, her grandparents forced her out of the house. Homeless, she camped in the woods near her hometown, surviving on whatever she could steal or barter. Aileen's first arrests came as a teenager for disorderly conduct, drunk driving, and theft. Juvenile records show short stints in detention centers and foster placements, none lasting long. Clinicians who later examined her referenced childhood trauma as a route for later diagnoses: borderline personality disorder, antisocial traits, and post-traumatic symptoms. One psychiatrist noted, "Chronic abuse and abandonment in childhood can distort a person's sense of safety and trust, setting the stage for destructive behavior in adulthood." A life marked by abandonment, abuse, and criminal survival was already in motion, long before Aileen Wuornos ever set foot on a Florida highway. Aileen Wuornos spent her adult years drifting along the highways of the American South, always on the move, rarely staying in one place for long. By the early 1980s, she had made her way to Florida, hitchhiking south and surviving on the edge of society. The state's sprawling network of interstates and back roads offered both opportunity and danger. For women like Aileen, the roadside sex trade was a harsh economy, one where a few dollars could mean the difference between a motel bed and another night under the open sky. She became a familiar figure at truck stops and highway off-ramps, soliciting rides and customers from passing motorists. The circuit was unpredictable, shaped by the rhythms of long-haul truckers and seasonal travelers. Aileen would flag down drivers, negotiate quick transactions, and disappear just as quickly. Each encounter was a gamble, with violence always a possibility. Police records show she used multiple aliases, making it harder for authorities to track her movements or tie her to any single location. Her criminal record kept growing. In 1986, she was convicted of armed robbery after holding up a Daytona Beach convenience store with a loaded gun. The sentence, just over a year in prison, did little to change her course. After her release, she returned to the highways, resuming sex work and petty theft. She often traveled with whatever she could carry, sometimes alone, sometimes with a companion. The highways offered anonymity, but also isolation. In this world, the line between client and victim could blur in an instant, and the risks only increased as desperation set in. By the late 1980s, Aileen's life had become a cycle of roadside hustles, brief stays in cheap motels, and constant movement across Florida's sun-baked roads. The environment made her both invisible and exposed, placing her in direct contact with strangers at all hours. It was this transient, high-risk routine that set the stage for the violence that would soon follow. In late November 1989, Richard Mallory left his electronics shop in Daytona Beach and never returned. His body was discovered nearly 2 weeks later, hidden in the underbrush off a remote stretch of Interstate 95. Mallory, age 51, had been shot 3 times in the chest with a .22 caliber handgun. His Cadillac was abandoned nearby, and his pockets were turned inside out. Pawn shop records soon revealed his camera, and other belongings had been sold just days after his death, and a thumbprint on the receipt later matched Aileen Wuornos. By the spring of 1990, another body was found. David Spears, a 43-year-old construction worker, was discovered nude along U.S. Route 19 in Citrus County. He had been shot 6 times with the same .22 caliber weapon. Like Mallory, Spears was last seen driving alone, and his vehicle was later recovered miles from where his body lay. The violence was sudden and excessive. The bullets clustered in his torso. Just weeks later, Charles Carskadden, a 40-year-old part-time rodeo worker, was found dead in Pasco County. He had been shot 9 times with a .22 caliber pistol, his body wrapped in an electric blanket and left to decompose in the summer heat. His car, too, was abandoned. Each victim was a middle-aged man, each picked up along a highway, each killed with the same small caliber handgun. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Investigators began to suspect a single hand behind the violence, one that moved unseen along Florida's endless roads. Troy Burris, 50, left for his delivery route on July 30, 1990, and never returned. His truck sat abandoned in Marion County, and 5 days later searchers found his body hidden in the palmettos. He had been shot twice with a .22 caliber firearm. The murder rattled the local trucking community, who began traveling in pairs, wary of the highways they once trusted. On September 11th, Dick Humphreys, 56, a retired Air Force major and former police chief, disappeared. The next day, his body was discovered near a remote Marion County road, shot 6 times. Humphreys had spent his last years investigating child abuse, a detail that struck a chord with the public. His car surfaced later, abandoned and stripped in Suwannee County. Peter Seams, 65, vanished in June 1990 while driving north from Central Florida. His car was found crashed and abandoned in Orange Springs on July 4th. Witnesses remembered 2 women near the scene, but Seams himself was never found. His family waited for answers that never came. The word vanished hovered over their lives. Walter Antonio, 62, a trucker and police reservist, was found nearly nude and shot 4 times off a logging road in Dixie County on November 19th. His car turned up 5 days later in Brevard County. With Antonio, the toll reached 7 men in under a year. The randomness and speed of these killings left Florida's highways shadowed by fear and suspicion. Detectives tracked a trail of evidence that stretched from pawn shops to Florida's back roads. A single pawn receipt, dated just days after Richard Mallory's murder, bore Aileen Wuornos' thumbprint. That print, matched in the state database, linked her to Mallory's stolen camera and set off a chain of investigative breakthroughs. Police quietly closed in, watching Wuornos' movements and learning she frequented the Last Resort bar in Volusia County. On January 9, 1991, officers moved in and arrested her without incident. Meanwhile, Tyria Moore had already left Florida and was living with relatives. When detectives found her, they offered immunity in exchange for cooperation. Moore agreed, and under police direction, she made a series of recorded phone calls to Wuornos from a Daytona motel. Over 11 calls, Moore pleaded for reassurance, saying she feared being charged. Wuornos, sensing Moore's distress, promised to take full responsibility. On January 16th, Wuornos confessed on tape to the murders, repeating her claim that she killed in self-defense. The evidence, pawn slips, prints, and her own words would soon fill the courtroom. Inside the Volusia County Courthouse, the trial of Aileen Wuornos began on January 14, 1992, drawing national attention. Prosecutors laid out a case built on forensic evidence, pawn receipts, and her own taped confession. The defense countered with accounts of childhood trauma, presenting psychiatric experts who diagnosed Wuornos with borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. They described a woman shaped by abuse, arguing her mental state impaired her judgment. The prosecution dismissed these claims, pointing to the pattern of killings and evidence of robbery. The judge allowed testimony from other murder cases, a rare move that painted a picture of repeated violence. Wuornos insisted she acted in self-defense, but the jury saw her as calculating and relentless. After less than 2 hours of deliberation, they found her guilty of first-degree murder. On January 31, 1992, Judge Uriel Blount sentenced her to death. In that moment, the courtroom fell silent, the weight of the verdict settling over everyone present. Aileen Wuornos is gone, but her case still haunts the justice system. Each year, women make up just 10% of homicide arrests, yet their stories spark complex debates about trauma, violence, and accountability. What we choose to remember shapes how we respond to those most at risk. Share your thoughts below.